Given that Russia has been so focused on Ukraine for over 3.5 years, it's easy to forget that Vladimir Putin has other ambitions. Ukraine is just the starting point, albeit one that's taken Russia far longer to conquer than originally planned. If Ukraine falls, Putin has his sights set further afield. He's looking at NATO, and he's getting ready for a fight. Intelligence reveals that Russia is preparing for a war with NATO, and the proof lies in something that many wouldn't think Russia is capable of doing. In its September 21st Russian Offensive Campaign Assessment, the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, revealed that Russia is doing something that the sheer scale of its losses in Ukraine suggests shouldn't be possible. According to an unnamed insider source, the ISW says Russia has been working on forming a strategic reserve of new recruits that it may one day deploy against NATO. The recruitment numbers suggest that the unnamed source may be onto something. The source says that about 290,000 people have signed contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense between the start of 2025 and September 15th of this year. That amounts to about 31,600 recruits per month, which is an interesting number. Back in June, the ISW's Russia team lead George Barros told the Kyiv Independent that Russia's losses are high enough that this rate of monthly recruitment wouldn't cover them. They lose somewhere in the ballpark of 35,000 to 45,000 people per month, and perhaps they recruit a little bit north of that number, Barros said at the time. The ISW's new insider may have their numbers wrong, or perhaps Russia's losses are lower than anticipated. Barros also says that Russia perhaps recruits a little bit north of the number of losses he suggested in June, which still lends credence to the idea that a reserve force is being built. There may also be another factor at play, which we'll get to in a moment. Whatever the true numbers may be, one thing appears certain: Russia is recruiting more soldiers than it's using in Ukraine. The insider source stated that some of these recruits are joining the strategic reserve that Russia has been forming since early July 2025, the ISW says. The source did not specify how many recruits are going to the strategic reserve as opposed to the front line in Ukraine. Granted, this may seem a little sketchy. What we have here is an unnamed source claiming that Russia is building a reserve without providing any numbers beyond the country's total recruitment figures. That's all we have to go on, but as the ISW expands, what we may be seeing is Russia reacting to developments on the Ukrainian battlefield that are starting to play out in its favor. In short, Russia's casualty rate seems to be declining. The ISW says that Russia started the year losing somewhere close to the number of soldiers Barros claimed in his quote for the Kyiv Independent. Between January and July, the country's monthly casualty rate bounced between 32,000 and 48,000. If the rate stayed the same for the rest of 2025, that would mean Russia's recruitment is nowhere near high enough to cover these losses, never mind building a reserve force. But here's the thing, Russia's casualty rate hasn't stayed the same. In August, the ISW reports Russia's casualty rate declined to around 29,000 for the month. UKR Inform provides a more exact figure in a Facebook post where it says that Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Alexander Syrskyi, confirmed that Russia lost 28,790 soldiers during August. That's more than 3,000 fewer than Russia's worst month during the first 7 months of 2025. And if September is any indication, this decline isn't a one-time thing. During the first half of September, Russia lost 13,000 soldiers. Assuming that the casualty rate stays consistent, that will mean a monthly total of 26,000, which is another decline from August. Now remember the monthly recruitment figure we shared earlier, 31,600. For the first time in 2025, Russia is recruiting more soldiers per month than it's losing in Ukraine. And that means there are thousands of recruits available for a reserve force. Specifically, Russia will have 5,600 more than it needs to replenish the Ukraine war losses in September. Those add to nearly 3,000 recruits going spare in August. The ISW adds that Russia's territorial gains were less costly in terms of casualties between May and August of this year than they were during the spring. And it's that reduced casualty rate in return for similar amounts of territory that may have led to Russia becoming confident in the idea of building a reserve force. So the obvious question arises, what changed in Russia's approach during the summer? Politico offered some hints on July 6th in an article where it noted that Ukraine had been forced to revamp its defenses in the regions Russia targeted during Russia's summer offensive. This revamp didn't make the fortifications larger or more capable of dealing with the mechanized assaults upon which Russia had relied for most of the war up until that point. The defenses were being adapted because Russia had taken to using much smaller units to attack Ukraine. Syrskyi highlighted the difference when speaking to journalists at the end of June, the outlet says. Now we see that the most effective position is a maximum one of detachment, and there are mainly groups of trenches, even so-called foxholes, which makes it impossible for the enemy to use strike drones. After all, now a drone, especially on fiber optics, can penetrate any hole, Syrskyi said of Ukraine's new defenses. That change happened because Russia had gone from initially attacking with full battalions, numbering 500 troops, to launching assaults first with 100 or so soldiers and then down to platoons of as few as 20. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, made a similar claim in June, though it framed Russia's smaller troop deployments as an example of the country's battlefield woes in Ukraine. However, it appears now that CSIS was getting ahead of itself. The smaller troop deployments may not have been a sign of Russian manpower issues. Instead, they could be a calculated move made by Russia, whereby it still achieves an acceptable rate of territory snatching while losing fewer troops to take that territory than it has in the past. The ISW certainly seems to think that this scenario may be the real case. It says that its unnamed source's revelation of a reserve force may indicate that Russia is not only happy with its current rate of advance, but that it will also be able to sustain both its lowered casualty rate and its current recruitment numbers. And Russia certainly is advancing, though still not at a fast pace. On August 13th, for instance, Russia Matters released a Russia-Ukraine war report card covering the period between July 15th and August 12th. It said that Russia managed to take 241 square miles of Ukraine during that period, which represented a 7% increase over the 226 square miles snatched between July 8th and August 5th. This is far from a fast rate of advance, but it may be enough for Putin. The formation of the Strategic Reserve may indicate that the Russian military command assesses the Russian forces will be able to continue their current rate of advance using these small group tactics that allow the Russian command to deploy fewer personnel to the front line, the ISW says in its report. What this indicates is that the creeping advances Russia is making are still fast enough for Putin to consider successful, even if those advances don't incorporate the taking of any major cities. That's where Russia's strategy might come unstuck. At the beginning of August, Russia's forces managed to punch a small 7.45-mile hole through Ukraine's defenses near the fortified city of Pokrovsk. That advance was short-lived as Ukraine sent the infamous Azov Brigade to reinforce its defensive and cut the incursion off. The episode revealed that though Russia's smaller units can punch holes, they lack the size and support needed to turn small gaps in Ukraine's defenses into full-blown assaults against fortified cities. If Russia is to take a city like Pokrovsk, it's likely going to have to lay siege to it in much the same way that it has done against many of Ukraine's other cities during the war. Such an assault would quickly deplete the reserves Russia is building if past evidence is anything to go by. But for Putin, that's a problem for another day. Right now, Russia's lower casualty rate appears to be affording Putin the luxury of building a strategic reserve. Of course, low is a relative term. Beyond the monthly figures we shared earlier in the video, Russia's 2025 casualty rate is low compared to what it was in 2024. Last year, Ukraine claimed that Russia lost 430,000 soldiers, amounting to monthly losses of a little over 35,800. If Russia has maintained the same loss rate that we saw up to July of 2025, we would likely have seen a similar annual total for this year, leaving no room for creating a reserve. That's not what happened. Russia's casualty rate has declined markedly since it started using its new small unit strategy. It's also worth mentioning that Russia has the numbers to maintain its current recruitment rate for quite some time. According to Global Firepower, the country has a little over 46 million people, out of a population of about 140 million who are fit for service. Russia also has about 1.26 million people reaching military age every year, meaning Putin has a constant stream of potential new soldiers coming through the pipeline. Keep that point about young recruits in mind, we'll be coming back to it later. The point for now is that the numbers all seem to be working in Russia's favor. It's still losing soldiers at a heavy rate, albeit one that the Kremlin seems to deem acceptable. For the first time in a long time, recruitment is outpacing casualties. Plus, Russia is a big country with a lot of people that the Kremlin can convince, cajole, or outright force into military service, which is something that can't go ignored. All of these factors indicate that Russia is in a position to start building its reserve force. Logic would dictate that any extra people that Russia is recruiting should be sent into Ukraine. An already large force could be made overwhelming if Russia is at the point where it can send more soldiers into Ukraine than it's losing every month. But Russia is building a reserve army rather than doing that. Not just because Putin appears happy with its slow rate of advance in Ukraine, but because Russia's leader has another target on his mind: NATO. Reports that Russia is creating a strategic reserve further indicate that the Kremlin is not interested in ending its war against Ukraine, but remains committed to achieving its war goals on the battlefield and may be preparing for a conflict with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the ISW says. It repeats the same claim later in its report, reinforcing the idea that Putin now has eyes on the future. Russia's leader believes that his country's current approach will be enough to take Ukraine, even if the task takes several years to complete. Putin certainly has no intention of stopping or working towards peace, as his recent actions indicate. Despite taking part in peace talks involving the US, Russia has continued to launch assaults on the ground while bombarding Ukraine with missiles and drones. Putin is happy to keep on pushing based on the current numbers. Plus, as the ISW notes, and as we mentioned earlier, Russia's youth may end up playing a major role in the reserve force Russia is now building. The ISW notes that preparations for a conflict between Russia and NATO now seem likely, especially as Russia is investing heavily in new programs designed to recruit Russian school leavers into the country's military for many years to come. The Defense Post reported on these new programs in July. Chief among them are academic programs that are being pushed in Russia's schools to guide children toward interests that would make them useful from a military perspective. Not all of these programs focus on the physical aspects of being a soldier. Many instead cover hybrid warfare-adjacent subjects such as coding and electronic warfare. The outlet also reports that some Russian schools even have drone design classes, demonstrating that Russia may be looking for budding engineers who could help it get a leg up on Ukraine in the drone warfare department. In some cases, students are even being drafted in to work on existing military initiatives, the Defense Post says. Putin is trying to indoctrinate them early, so they'll be more likely to say yes when the recruiters come calling with promises of bumper pay packets. Gamification is also a new tool being used for military recruitment. The Defense Post cites one Russian gaming platform that has attracted over 600,000 players, with promises of extra marks being given to participants on their school-leaving exams. It's a strange form of bribery almost, and it's something that Russia is using to guide impressionable children toward its military. That gaming platform has also been linked to a series of puzzles in which students are tasked to solve sanctions-related and technical challenges created by Russia's defense contractors. We say created. We really mean that these are problems that those contractors already face and are clearly looking for smart young minds who could help with circumvention. In August, Radio Free Europe noted that it's not just Russian children who are being targeted by these kinds of programs. In Kyrgyzstan, children are being offered a chance to join what appear to be vocational schools that offer promises of studying abroad and learning how to build drones. Brochures are brazenly being handed out encouraging children to join the best alongside pictures of youngsters in military uniform. Of course, militaries targeting young people is nothing new. However, there's a determination seen in these programs that is odd. Russia isn't handing out brochures and asking youngsters to consider joining the military. It's using programs specifically designed to absorb participants into a military culture, so they'll be more willing to sign the papers when they come of age and recruiters come calling. And if the ISW is to be believed, these sorts of programs amount to Russia's long-term process for building the reserve military that may soon be turned on NATO. Beyond disturbing youth programs and the building of a reserve force, there are other signs that Russia is gearing up for a war with NATO. Putin has been pushing buttons and testing limits over the last few weeks. Russia continues to test the limits of NATO's air defenses over the Baltic Sea as Russia increases the frequency of its violations of NATO states' airspace, the ISW says. It also notes that NATO asked Germany to scramble a pair of Eurofighters to intercept an unidentified Russian aircraft over the Baltic Sea on September 21st. That's far from the only recent incursion by Russian aerial assets into NATO airspace in September. Earlier in the month, Poland reported that 19 Russian drones had entered its airspace, with several of those drones having to be shot down. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said the incident amounted to the closest we have been to open conflict since World War II, which underscored the severity of the issue. Just a few days later, a Russian drone ended up in Romanian airspace, though this event was at least less eventful than the Polish incursion as the latter led to property damage. Both Poland and Romania are NATO members. So too is Estonia, that has its own problems with Russia sending aerial assets into its airspace on September 19th. This time it wasn't drones, Russia sent a trio of MiG-31s, all of which ignored attempted communication from Estonia and stayed in the country's airspace until NATO fighter jets guided them away. We covered this incident in a video, so check it out to learn more about what Russia did and how Estonia's response could change NATO's reaction to such incursions in the future. Russia is denying responsibility for these incidents, but it's clear what's happening. Moscow wants to figure out how far it needs to push to force a NATO reaction. That alone would be worrying enough, but when you add these incursions to the reported building of a reserve force, Russia's military programs focused on children, and what appears to be Putin's satisfaction at the way the Ukraine war is going, you get a powder keg, one that some in NATO believe is going to explode all over the European continent. NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte seems to believe that Russia could be preparing for something big. Back in June, The Guardian reported that Rutte claimed that Russia could be ready to attack NATO within the next 5 years. Rutte also called for a quantum leap in our collective offense when speaking at Chatham House in London. That leap involves NATO setting a new recommendation that each of its members spend 5% of their gross domestic product, rather than the previous 2%, to prepare for the Russian threat. Maybe Rutte knew something we didn't know at the time. And perhaps the ISW's unnamed insider has just revealed what that something is. What seems clear is that NATO needs to prepare for a fight, though it isn't clear when that fight will happen. Rutte says that Russia will be ready in 5 years, but will Putin wait that long? 5 years is a long time for a leader who is already 72 and will soon turn 73. It's possible that Russia's new reserve program may be designed to allow for a war with NATO sooner than Rutte claims. If that war happens, opinions are divided over which side would win. In September, the week suggested that NATO, with the US or without it, should be enough to defeat Russia as it stands today. The outlet cited NATO's technological superiority and the interoperability of over 30 members as being key factors in what will be a NATO victory, assuming a conventional war. Writing for The Telegraph, George Allison arrived at a similar conclusion, noting that the numbers are all in NATO's favor, even if questions exist over the collective defense organization's endurance against a grinding attritional war. However, if we go back to January, Steve Jeremy of Responsible Statecraft claimed that NATO may not be ready for Russia. He claims that cumbersome decision-making, a lack of strategy, and the exposure of key NATO strategic assets such as ports and air bases to ballistic missile threats would all be factors. Still, it seems like NATO should have the advantage. And it's precisely that advantage, especially when it comes to manpower numbers, that Russia seems to be trying to counter. As it maintains its force in Ukraine, it's building a secondary army that may one day be ready to battle NATO. Will NATO be ready? When will the war come? Could Ukraine manage to deplete Putin's forces enough to ensure that this conflict between Russia and NATO never happens? Only time will tell. One thing that Putin may not have anticipated as he starts building Russia's reserve army is that one of his greatest allies may be about to turn its back on his country. Belarus is imploding as Putin's war is destroying everything, and the issues just may be severe enough to create a split. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering Russia's latest tests of NATO's resolve. And thank you as always for watching.